Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the bully of Skidmore Part 2. This is the story of Ken Rex McElroy. When we last left off, we had talked about how McElroy grew up and how he grew up poor, and he really just did not like a lot of people that would live in nice homes or have nice cars or even wear nice clothes. Most of which because when he would be forced to take school, which he hated, he would actually be relentlessly bullied for being poor, and then later on be relentlessly bullied for not being able to read. And this would actually in turn kind of turn McElroy into a town bully, because around the time that he was 12, he would begin outgrowing most of his classmates, and this is where his bullying actually started. There we talked about that around the time that he was 14 or 15 years old, he would drop out of school. And shortly after dropping out, he would begin robbing farms, not just in Skidmore, but towns outside of Skidmore. And what he would do is he would drive around and look for a farm that seemed to have more potential. And once he had found a particular farm that he had set his eyes on, he would go out and purchase himself dark clothes, dark boots, and would go to that farm around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. He would take some bags and he would either steal grain from silos that were left open. He would also siphon gas out of tractors and trucks. He would also go and steal hogs that were also in those farms as well. And how he would do that is he would go over there and he would lift them up and carry them over to the back of his truck and put them in. And then he would actually drive and take all of the items that he had stolen, and he would give it to a woman who would actually take it to a farm auction and sell them off. After he had gotten his money or sexual services from this woman, he would actually return and discard all the items he had bought or stolen the things off of. A lot of the farmers were very well aware that they knew it was Ken McElroy that was robbing from them, and would even call the police. And one particular police in general, Marvin Dykus, would actually investigate a lot of these robberies, and he would later say that he knew it was Ken McElroy that robbed these farms. He just could not prove it. And a lot of times what would happen is by the time the farmers would report the robbery, they would have to track it down, and by the time they had went to find the livestock, for example, that would be stolen, they would take the farmers to these farmers auction, and they would have to actually try to pinpoint 5 or 6 pigs out of 500. So it was almost like finding a needle in a haystack. And a lot of times, by the time that the police were called, McElroy was already gone and already had the money for the stolen products. During the height of his robberies, McElroy would begin putting top-of-the-line police scanners in all of his trucks, and this is actually how he stayed on top of everything when it came to the police. And what he would do is he would just hire adolescent boys that lived in the town of Skidmore, and they would get in these trucks and they would just rob these farms on a nightly basis. It is also said that on most occasions, McElroy would take his girlfriends on these excursions, and they would drive around, steal what they could, and sell it, and that was about the end of it. Dykus would actually make a statement later on and say that in order to actually bust McElroy with the robberies, they would actually have to physically see him load everything in the trucks, which they never could. But this is something that we will soon find out, that McElroy just had a really good habit of performing crimes and later having the charges either dropped or just not being able to bust him. They would even go and say that on several occasions they would actually go to the residence of McElroy and ask to inspect his property for the stolen items, to which McElroy would look at him and refuse and tell them that he was not going to allow them on his property until they had a warrant, by which point they had to go back, get a warrant to check his property. But at that point, whatever McElroy had at his residence was either already sold or discarded by that time. McElroy would very confidently look at the police and tell them, if you think you got a charge against me, prove it. This would be a reoccurring statement that he would say multiple times in his lifetime. I'm just going to come out and just say this right now. Ken McElroy was a fucking bastard. Take that as your warning for the next part of this story. It's not going to be pretty. But take that as your second warning about this story. Ken McElroy would be known as a womanizer. And I will also like to add Ken McElroy's definition of potential girlfriends to date and what society considers girlfriends to date would be completely polar opposites. At the time that he was young, he was a very, very well-built man. He had dark hair, deep blue eyes, and sideburns. He almost had a mimic of the Elvis Presley look. Not to mention the fact that he used to throw around money like he was made of money. And to add on the fact he had this bad boy attitude that the girls just loved. And so a lot of times he was entertaining multiple women at once. In 1952, when Ken McElroy was only 18, he would actually marry 16-year-old Oleta McElroy, to where they would, at their marriage, jump between Denver and Colorado before settling in St. Joseph's, where Oleta's family actually lived. Now, at this point in time when he was married, McElroy rarely stayed home. He would spend most of his times drinking, fighting, stealing, and sleeping with other women. And Oleta would actually learn that McElroy just was a different type of breed. He was the kind of person that if she questioned him about where he was, and if she would just have anything to say that would set him off, he would just physically beat her till she was black and blue. So she kind of learned to kind of keep her head down and stay quiet. A former associate of McElroy would actually recall that on several occasions, women around his age would actually approach him and show genuine interest in dating him, to which he would laugh and reject them and say, "Nah, you're too old for me. I like my meat young and tender. I like that young meat." To name a few, there was the 17-year-old Barbara, there was the 13-year-old Donna, and then there was the 15-year-old Sharon. Sharon he would meet when he was 24 years old. On one particular evening, shortly after Sharon and McElroy had met, they would actually be arguing in his truck. And during the argument, McElroy would actually take his shotgun off of his gun rack and wave it around in front of Sharon to try to threaten and scare her. The gun would actually go off, shooting her underneath her chin. Luckily, Sharon would actually survive the attack, but her family, who lived in St. Joseph's, would actually go to try to press charges against McElroy. It is said that shortly after it, they would actually drop the charges of assault with a deadly weapon. Now, it's not really said what happened that made them drop the charges, but McElroy had a certain way of getting people to drop charges against him. Some of those ways would include stalking their houses at night at the truck and just sitting down and watching them, and when they would peek out the windows waving the gun around them, calling the houses on a daily basis, threatening their lives, or even walking up into their house and brandishing a gun in front of them and threatening to kill them or their family. Like I said, it is not said how he did anything to get them to drop the charges, but they would eventually drop the charges. And McElroy would eventually divorce his wife Oleta and actually marry the 15-year-old Sharon that he had shot in his truck.